Hey everybody, Mr. Schaefer here. Want to touch briefly with you about some of the topics in Chapter 7 for this week. Give you an overview of sort of what to look at in the section in the book and what your assignments are going to look at. First and foremost, the discussion board is going to ask you to look at the U.S. transition from an industrial economy, manufacturing, to a service economy. You know, waiters, waitresses, airline pilots, people working in hotels, travel agents, that kind of stuff. Sort of a service-oriented economy, and sort of what that transition looks like, and also, more importantly, if that's a good or bad change. Sort of the benefits and or negatives of that transition from an industrial economy to a service sector economy. So look at the board prompts I have on that, and then the articles I have sort of underneath might help you sort of address that question. The other part is some topics to focus on in the book, and that will help you on this week's exam and also this week's assignment, which will force you to sort of get out and drive around and maybe snap some photographs to tie in with the section. But in Chapter 7, it's looking at the geography of economic sectors. And there are three sort of sectors economically that we'll look at in the chapter, but then also you will look at for the assignment that I have for you for this week. There's sort of three basic economic sectors. There's primary sector, and that is basic production, extraction of the raw materials coming from the ground. Around here, it's growing chickens, it's growing soybeans, it's growing corn, sort of basic raw materials. More broadly, it might be like, you know, a quarry in Pennsylvania, for example, or it might be a farm fields, you know, in the Midwest, or it might be something akin to that. That's the primary sector is focusing on the actual extraction of the individual raw materials. So that's some background on that. The second sector the book talks about is the secondary sector, and that is where you take the actual raw material and you transition it into something useful. So, for example, to be consistent here, if the primary sector down here is like growing chickens on Delmarva, the secondary sector would be, you know, turning those chickens into like, you know, Popeye's chicken sandwiches, which are really good, by the way. Sort of the transition of this good into something useful like a chicken sandwich or a chicken nugget. That's the secondary sector. And some other examples from the text that they'll talk about is, you know, a steel making facility. This is in Amsterdam, or a steel mill in Baltimore City, or as the text will also show you, a clothing manufacturer to take sort of you know, the rolls of yarn, in this case silk, and make it into clothing we can wear. That's all secondary economic activity. The third factor, like his third economic sector to focus on, is what's called the tertiary sector. This is the sort of highest level, top of the pyramid, but also is what makes everything else possible. These are the banks that give loans for entrepreneurs and business people to open business, maintain their business, grow their business. This is the transport companies like FedEx, UPS, DHL, that move goods and services across the country. Maybe it's Norfolk Southern Railway, which goes right through Salisbury. Okay, so additionally, education. To go with my chicken example, okay, think about like Salisbury University Business School teaching, you know, 18, 19, 20, 21-year-olds to, you know, market certain products, accounting skills to sort of keep the books of these corporations, advertising executives for these corporations. So the tertiary sector makes everything else possible. More broadly, the book will talk about this, but the stock exchange, as the book talks about, and the investors on the stock exchange and their capital in those companies help them expand their operations and grow their operations. So these are sort of the three main economic sectors. This is the focus of your reading for this week, but also for the assignment. The assignment I have for you this week is to go out and drive around Delmarva and get three pictures, something around here of primary sector stuff, take a photo, explain how it ties in. Second picture of a secondary economic sector on Delmarva. Take a picture and then write an explanation of how it sort of ties in. Get a third picture, the tertiary sector, you know, in Delmarva that makes these other two sectors possible. Think banks around here. Think the Salisbury Airport. the transportation that sort of brings in goods and services from all over the world to Delmarva. So your assignment for the week will have you look around Delmarva and find an example of each one of these sectors. Take a picture, drop it in the document I have for you, do a brief write-up. In the book itself, as you read, some other things to focus on are sort of these economic resources and how resources are managed, used, and disseminated amongst the populations. The other thing to focus on is the historical and spatial development of major economic sectors. Sort of in history, which ones of these have been most important, which ones are becoming maybe less important and more important. For example, now in the U.S., the manufacturing sector is becoming least important. It's like secondary sector. And tertiary sector, jobs and services are becoming more important in the U.S. So there's a transition going on in many economies. In places like India and China, they're still pretty much based on sort of primary and secondary economic sectors. Extraction of raw materials and manufacturing into something useful like a shirt or an iPhone or rolls of steel or cars or something like that. And the last one to focus on is the impact of globalization, how an interconnected global world in terms of economies and trade, how that impacts regions and geographies of the world, pros and cons with that. So brief overview, some things to consider when tackling this week's assignment. Good luck, and I'll talk to you guys soon.